Elaine Carter was 36 years old, yet on most nights she felt twice her age. Her modest two-story home on the edge of town had grown colder with each passing year. The walls, once filled with laughter and music, now echoed only silence. Her husband, Richard, was often gone on business trips, working long hours that left him absent not only from the house, but also from her life. He called when he remembered, came home when it was convenient, and always seemed too tired to notice the woman waiting for him. Elaine would sit by the window some evenings, looking out into the streetlights' glow, wondering when her life had turned into a routine of waiting. Her reflection in the glass startled her at times, the faint lines around her eyes, the tiredness that makeup could not hide. She was still attractive, even striking, but in her own mind she was fading, becoming invisible. One Sunday afternoon, she confided in her closest friend, Monica. They met at a quiet diner, the kind where the coffee was always lukewarm and the regulars sat in the same booth year after year. "You can't keep living like this," Monica said, stirring her cup. Her voice carried the tone of someone who had rehearsed the sentence many times. "It's like you're a ghost haunting your own marriage." Elaine gave a weary smile, pushing the plate of untouched pie to the side. "I just want to feel alive again. Not as a wife who waits, not as a woman forgotten. Just me. Do you know what I mean?" Monica reached across the table and took her hand. "I know. But be careful, Elaine. Loneliness can make us do reckless things." The words stayed with Elaine as she drove home. She passed rows of houses lit with the soft glow of family life. Children chasing each other across lawns, couples sharing glasses of wine on porches. All she felt was the cavern of silence that awaited her inside her own door. That night, she stood in front of the mirror longer than usual. The overhead light cast shadows across her face, but beneath the fatigue there was still a woman who longed to be noticed. She leaned in, tracing the curve of her jaw, searching for the spark that used to define her. Memories of her younger years, of reckless laughter, of nights that felt endless, flooded back, reminding her of a time when she was bold and unafraid. Elaine whispered to herself, almost like a prayer, "I just want one moment, one night where I don't feel invisible." It wasn't desire for betrayal, nor the thrill of danger, that tugged at her heart. It was the hunger for connection, the craving to be touched not out of duty but out of passion, to be seen not as someone's wife, but as a woman who still carried fire in her soul. The town around her would never have guessed the storm brewing in her heart. To the neighbors, she was simply Elaine, polite, well-mannered, a woman who attended church on Sundays and waved at the mailman. But beneath that polite smile was a woman standing on the edge of a choice that would alter her life forever. And as she turned away from the mirror, a subtle shiver ran down her spine. She didn't know it yet, but the hunger to feel alive again would lead her into a night of passion that carried the seeds of horror, a night she would never forget. On a humid Friday night, Elaine decided she could no longer sit at home waiting for a husband who would not come. She slipped into a simple black dress that hugged her curves in ways she hadn't allowed herself in years. With hesitant courage, she drove into town, parking near the row of neon-lit bars where laughter spilled onto the streets. She told herself she was only going for a drink, only to feel the hum of life around her again. Inside, the bar was dim but alive, music vibrating through the wooden floor, conversations overlapping in waves. Couples leaned close in corners, young people crowded near the jukebox. Elaine slid onto a stool at the far end, ordering a glass of red wine. She hoped to blend into the background, yet a part of her longed to be noticed. That was when she saw him. Darren couldn't have been more than 18, though he carried himself with a restless swagger that made him look older. He had a sharp jawline, boyish charm, and the reckless energy of someone just stepping into adulthood. His laughter rang across the bar as he teased friends at the pool table, but his eyes, dark, alert, caught Elaine's and lingered. She looked away quickly, cheeks warming. "What am I doing?" she thought. But moments later, he was walking toward her, confidence in every step. "You don't look like you belong here," he said with a half-smile, sliding onto the stool beside her. Elaine glanced at him, trying to mask her nerves. "And what does that mean?" "It means you look different," Darren replied, leaning in slightly. "Not like the girls my age who come here just to scream over the music. You've got something else, something that stands out." His boldness startled her, but it also stirred something deep inside, something she hadn't felt in years. She sipped her wine slowly, searching for words. I'm probably too old to be sitting here talking to you. Age is just a number, Darren said, grinning as if the line was both cliché and true. Besides, it's not about numbers. It's about moments. Don't you think? Elaine laughed softly, though her heart beat faster than it should. Moments can be dangerous. Sometimes dangerous is what makes life real. His words hung in the air like a challenge. Elaine told herself she should walk away, pay her bill, go home. But Darren's attention wrapped around her like a flame, and for the first time in years she felt seen, not as a wife fading into the background, not as a woman forgotten, but as someone worth pursuing. They talked for over an hour. Darren asked about her favorite music, her dreams when she was younger, the kind of things Richard had stopped asking long ago. He listened with genuine curiosity, and Elaine felt her guard slipping. The world beyond that bar seemed to dissolve into nothing but the space between them. At one point, Darren leaned closer, his voice dropping. You know, you don't have to keep pretending you're just here for a drink. You want more than that. I can see it. Her breath caught. She should have denied it, but instead she whispered, maybe I do. When they left the bar together, the night air was thick and buzzing, as if the town itself knew a line had been crossed. Elaine's pulse raced with both fear and excitement. She had no idea that by stepping into Darren's orbit, she was walking toward a night that would awaken not just her desire, but her doom. Elaine followed Darren through the quiet streets, her heels clicking against the cracked sidewalk. The night smelled of summer rain, heavy and damp, yet her body trembled with a heat that came from somewhere deeper. She knew she should turn back, that what she was doing was reckless, even shameful, but the part of her that had been starved for years pushed her forward. Darren led her to a small apartment above an old hardware store. The stairwell creaked under their steps, and the dim hallway smelled faintly of cigarette smoke and old paint. When he unlocked the door, the place was exactly what she expected of an 18-year-old. Clothes piled on a chair, half-empty soda cans on the table, posters of rock bands tacked to the walls. Still, there was an energy about it, unpolished, alive, that drew her in. He poured them both cheap whiskey into mismatched glasses. Elaine held hers with a trembling hand, the burn of the liquor only adding to the whirlwind inside her chest. She tried to speak, to remind herself why she shouldn't be here, but Darren closed the distance between them before she could form the words. You don't have to explain, he said, his voice low. Just let go for once. She froze, heart hammering. Let go. It was exactly what she had wanted, yet feared. She looked into his young face, the daring confidence in his eyes, and for a moment she saw not a boy but a mirror reflecting her own hunger back at her. I shouldn't be here, Elaine whispered. Then don't be here, Darren challenged softly, brushing his fingers against hers. Or stay, and live tonight like it's yours. The choice cracked open inside her. The years of neglect, the endless waiting, the loneliness that had become a second skin, all of it screamed for release. She set the glass down, her hand shaking, and leaned into the fire she had tried to deny. Their kiss was urgent, clumsy yet desperate. Elaine felt the guilt twisting inside her, but it was drowned beneath waves of passion. The black dress she had worn to feel alive slid from her shoulders, and Darren's hands pulled her closer with the hunger of youth. For a brief span of hours, she forgot everything. Her marriage, her shame, her age. She was simply a woman who wanted to feel again. But beneath that stolen intimacy, something darker lingered. Darren was too eager, too careless, as though hiding a secret he could not confess. His touch was heated, almost feverish, and when Elaine pulled back for air, she noticed a flicker of unease cross his face. Are you all right? She asked, her voice trembling. Darren forced a smile. Yeah, better than ever. But his eyes betrayed him, darting away as if to avoid the weight of her question. Elaine ignored it. She didn't want truth. She wanted escape. And so she gave herself over to the night, burying her doubts under the rush of sensation. Hours later, she lay tangled in the sheets, her body heavy with exhaustion, her mind adrift. Darren had already fallen asleep, one arm draped lazily across her. She stared at the ceiling, guilt pressing down like a stone, yet beneath it was a strange, fleeting peace. She thought she had found the connection she longed for. She thought the night would remain a secret memory. But in the silence of that dark apartment, the first threads of horror were already weaving their way into her body, unseen, unstoppable. By morning, she would realize the cost of her reckless hunger. The first rays of dawn crept through the blinds, striping the small apartment in pale gold. Elaine stirred beneath the tangled sheets, her head heavy from whiskey, her body still trembling from the reckless night. For a fleeting second, she thought she had found what she craved: escape, passion, the feeling of being alive again. But almost immediately, a sharp, searing pain stabbed through her lower body, so sudden that she gasped aloud. She sat up, clutching her abdomen, the room spinning around her. Darren mumbled something incoherent in his sleep, rolling over. Elaine pressed her lips together, trying to steady her breath, but the pain only deepened. It was unlike anything she had ever felt before, raw, invasive, as though her own body was turning against her. Then came the smell. At first, faint, like something spoiled left too long in the sun. But within moments it grew stronger, sour, and unmistakably foul. Elaine's heart pounded as panic flooded her. She pushed the blanket aside, scrambling for her clothes. Her hands shook as she pulled the dress back over her shoulders, every movement shadowed by the gnawing pain. "Oh God," she whispered, voice breaking. "Something's wrong. Something's terribly wrong." She rushed to the small bathroom, flicking on the dim light. The reflection that stared back at her was pale, haunted, her hair sticking to her damp forehead. When she dared to look down, the horror struck: redness, swelling, and a sickly discharge that made her stomach twist. The odor clung to the air, undeniable. Elaine staggered back from the mirror, gripping the sink as tears welled in her eyes. "What did he do to me?" Behind her, Darren's voice came groggy, still thick with sleep. "Elaine, you okay?" She spun, her face taut with fear and anger. "What's happening to me, Darren? What the hell did you give me?" Darren froze in the doorway, hair messy, eyes wide. For a fraction of a second, guilt flickered across his face before he masked it with forced calm. "It's nothing. You're just overthinking. Maybe the whiskey." "Don't lie to me," she snapped, her voice cracking under the weight of terror. "This isn't just whiskey. My body, it's rotting." The word echoed between them, heavy and unspoken before. Darren's lips parted, but no answer came. His silence was worse than denial. Elaine grabbed her purse, fumbling for her car keys. She could barely stand upright, but adrenaline carried her forward. Her heels clattered against the floor as she stormed out of the apartment, ignoring Darren's half-hearted protests. The morning air outside was damp and unforgiving, the sun now harsh against her pale skin. Each step toward her car was agony, but she forced herself on, clutching the steering wheel as if it were the only thing keeping her from collapsing. Inside the car, she broke down. Tears streamed down her cheeks as the stench lingered in her clothes, in her skin, in her very breath. She pounded the wheel with her fists, gasping between sobs. "Why did I do this? God, why did I let this happen?" For years, Elaine had longed to feel alive again. Now, driving herself toward the hospital in a haze of pain and shame, she realized the price of that longing might be her very life. Elaine's car swerved slightly as she pressed harder on the gas, sweat beading on her forehead despite the morning chill. Every bump in the road sent a jolt of pain through her body. The stench that clung to her only intensified, making her gag as she tried to keep her eyes on the road. She rolled down the window, desperate for air, but the smell was inside her. It wasn't going anywhere. By the time she reached the hospital, her hands were trembling so badly she could barely turn the key in the ignition. She stumbled from the car, clutching her purse to her chest as though it might anchor her. The sliding doors opened, and the antiseptic smell of the emergency room hit her like a wave. A nurse at the front desk looked up, startled. Elaine's face was pale, her eyes glassy with panic. "Help me," Elaine gasped, nearly collapsing onto the counter. "Something's wrong, it's bad." The nurse shot a quick glance at the odor that followed Elaine into the lobby. Without hesitation, she rushed around the counter, supporting Elaine by the arm. "We've got you. Let's get you to a room." Elaine could barely keep her balance as they guided her into a curtained exam area. The room buzzed with fluorescent light, the hum of machines filling the silence between her ragged breaths. Within minutes, a doctor entered, Dr. Harris, a seasoned man in his early 50s with a calm but firm presence. "What's happening?" he asked, pulling on gloves as he scanned her chart. Elaine clutched the thin hospital sheet around her trembling body. It started this morning, pain, so sharp I thought I was dying. And the smell, her voice cracked. Something is rotting inside me. Dr. Harris exchanged a grave glance with the nurse before pulling his stool closer. Elaine, I need you to be honest with me. Did you have sexual contact recently? Her heart thudded against her ribs. Shame washed over her face as tears stung her eyes. Yes, last night. With someone I barely knew. The doctor didn't flinch, though his eyes softened. All right, we'll run tests immediately. But from what I'm seeing already, you're dealing with a severe infection, potentially life-threatening. The words hit her like a hammer. She felt the room tilt, the sterile walls closing in. Life-threatening. Dr. Harris nodded solemnly. We need to start 4 antibiotics right away. If this doesn't improve quickly, surgery may be necessary. Do you understand? Elaine covered her face with her hands, muffling a sob. The weight of her choices crashed down all at once. The loneliness that had driven her to Darren, the reckless hunger that had blinded her, and now this. The nurse gently touched her shoulder. You're not alone. We'll take care of you. But Elaine's mind swirled with images of Darren's face, the flicker of guilt in his eyes, his silence when she begged him for the truth. Rage and fear tangled inside her. She whispered under her breath, half to herself and half to God. What did he do to me? As the force slid into her arm and the first drip of medication began its slow course into her veins, Elaine realized there was no turning back. This was no longer about loneliness or passion. It was about survival. And somewhere out there, Darren carried the secret that had brought her to this sterile room, fighting for her life. Back at his small apartment above the hardware store, Darren sat on the edge of his unmade bed, staring at the floor as the morning sun leaked through the blinds. The sheets still held Elaine's scent, a mixture of perfume and something sour that made his stomach twist. He ran his hands through his messy hair, fighting the nausea of regret. He had known this day might come. Deep down, he had always known. Months earlier, after a wild night with a girl he barely remembered, Darren had noticed strange symptoms. He ignored them at first, convincing himself it was nothing. But when the burning pain worsened, when the odor wouldn't go away, he finally dragged himself to a free clinic on the outskirts of town. The memory haunted him. The nurse's grim expression, the doctor's clinical voice. You've contracted a rare, aggressive infection. Highly contagious. You need treatment immediately, and you must inform your partners. But Darren never went back. He couldn't afford the medication, couldn't face the humiliation. And worse, he couldn't stand the thought of being marked. To him, being 18 meant possibility, not sickness. He buried the diagnosis, shoved the papers into a drawer, and pretended it wasn't real. Until last night. Elaine had looked at him like he mattered. Not like a kid, not like a mistake, but like a man. The way she leaned into him, the way her eyes softened when she laughed, it was intoxicating. For a moment, Darren had forgotten the shadow he carried. He had wanted to believe he could be normal, just once. But seeing her stagger to the bathroom this morning, hearing the terror in her voice, it shattered the illusion. He had seen the truth on her face. He had passed it on. His phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from Kyle, his closest friend. Where you at? Party tonight. Darren typed, erased, then finally answered. Not in the mood. Minutes later, Kyle called. Dude, what's going on? You sound like death. Darren hesitated, his throat dry. I screwed up, man. With someone older. And is she sick now? Real sick. There was silence on the line, then Kyle's voice dropped. Wait, you didn't tell her? About you know? I couldn't, Darren snapped, his voice cracking. You don't get it. She looked at me like I was worth something. If I told her, she would have walked away. Everyone walks away. Kyle cursed under his breath. Man, that's not just reckless, that's cruel. She could die from this. The words lodged in Darren's chest like shards of glass. He wanted to defend himself, to say he hadn't meant harm. But the truth was undeniable. He had chosen silence. He had chosen himself over her safety. When the call ended, Darren buried his face in his hands. He could still hear Elaine's voice echoing in his head. My body, it's rotting. He wanted to believe she'd be fine, that the hospital would fix what he had broken. But another voice whispered the truth. He had crossed a line that could never be undone. And though no one else knew yet, Darren understood that the secret he carried would not stay buried forever. Sooner or later, The town would learn what he had done. And when they did, there would be no place left for him to hide. By the following afternoon, whispers had already begun to weave their way through the small town. In a place where everyone knew everyone, secrets rarely stayed hidden for long. And Elaine Carter's sudden collapse at the hospital was too shocking to keep quiet. At the corner cafe, where the townsfolk gathered for their daily gossip over coffee and pie, her name was on every tongue. "I heard she came into the ER looking like death," one woman whispered, leaning over her cup. The nurses said the smell was so bad they cleared half the hallway. Another shook her head in disapproval. "That's what happens when a married woman fools around. God sees everything." Across the room, an older man chimed in, lowering his voice but not enough to hide the disdain. "And with that boy, Darren Mason? He's just 18, barely old enough to vote. What kind of woman does that?" The words stung, though Elaine wasn't there to hear them. Still, the judgment hung heavy in the air, spreading from one porch to another, from the church pews to the grocery store aisles. Half the town was quick to condemn her, painting her as reckless, immoral, desperate. But the other half directed their anger elsewhere. "Don't blame her alone," a younger woman countered in the cafe, slamming her spoon down. "That boy knew what he was carrying. He should have warned her. He put her life in danger." Voices rose in argument, the cafe buzzing with tension. Some saw Elaine as a sinner getting what she deserved. Others saw her as a victim betrayed by a careless, selfish boy. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Elaine lay weak and pale beneath crisp sheets, unaware of the firestorm outside. Richard sat by her bedside, jaw tight, hands clasped together. He had said little since the doctors explained the infection, but the fury in his silence was louder than any words. When Monica visited, she tried to offer comfort. "She needs love right now, Richard, not judgment." Richard's eyes flashed. "She broke our vows. She risked everything for one night. And now I have to sit here and watch her pay for it." His voice cracked, and for a moment the anger gave way to raw pain. Monica touched Elaine's limp hand. "She's already paying more than anyone should." Back across town, Darren's name was being dragged through the dirt. Mothers pulled their daughters closer, whispering warnings not to get near him. At the gas station, two men muttered by the pumps. "He's poisoned her, that's what he did. Boy's a walking disease. Should have been locked up the moment he knew." Darren heard every word when he tried to buy a soda that evening. The cashier barely looked at him, muttering, "God help you, son," before handing him his change. Darren left with his head down, shame burning through him. The town had drawn its battle lines. Elaine, fallen woman or tragic victim. Darren, reckless kid or dangerous predator. No one could agree, but one truth settled into every conversation. This wasn't going away. For a community built on appearances and reputation, the scandal was more than gossip. It was a wound, raw and festering, and everyone wanted someone to blame. The hospital room was heavy with silence, broken only by the steady beep of the heart monitor. Elaine lay against the pillows, her face pale, her body drained by both the infection and the shame weighing on her chest. She could feel her family's eyes on her, but she could not meet them. Richard sat stiffly in the chair beside her bed, his arms folded across his chest. His jaw was locked so tightly that a vein bulged at his temple. He had been there since morning, refusing to leave, yet offering no words of comfort. Finally, the silence broke. "You destroyed us," Richard said, his voice low and trembling with fury. "Do you understand that, Elaine? You destroyed everything we built." Elaine turned her face toward the window, tears burning her eyes. "I made a mistake," she whispered. "A terrible one. But I never meant. Richard cut her off, his voice rising. "You crawled into another man's bed. No, a boy's bed. And now I have to sit here watching you rot from the inside. Do you realize what you've done to me? To our name? To this family?" Elaine flinched at every word, as if each syllable were a blade slicing deeper. She wanted to defend herself, to explain the loneliness, the years of neglect, the hunger that had driven her into Darren's arms. But all that came out was a choked sob. In the corner, Elaine's mother, Margaret, sat hunched in a chair, her frail hands clutching a rosary. Her eyes, sharp with age, were full of both grief and tenderness. She spoke softly, her voice breaking through the storm. "Enough, Richard. She's still your wife. She's still my daughter." Richard whipped around, his anger now spilling toward her. Your daughter betrayed me. She dragged filth into our marriage bed. How am I supposed to look at her again? Margaret rose slowly, her back bent but her spirit unshaken. She stepped to Elaine's bedside, brushing her daughter's hair back from her damp forehead. You look at her as a woman who is broken, not evil. A woman who needs grace more than punishment. Elaine finally met her mother's eyes. The compassion there undid her, and she broke down, clutching Margaret's hand as tears streamed down her cheeks. Mama, I'm sorry. I just wanted to feel alive again. I never thought it would end like this. Margaret kissed her forehead gently. We all crave something, child. Sometimes our hunger leads us down dark roads. But no sin, no mistake, makes you less my daughter. Richard turned away, his shoulders heaving, torn between rage and grief. He couldn't look at her, not yet, but deep down he knew his anger was fueled by the wound of betrayal, not just her actions. Richard left the hospital room that night under the weight of a silence he could no longer bear. The corridors smelled of antiseptic, the dim lights reflecting against the polished floors. He walked until he found himself outside, the cool night air rushing against his face. For a long moment, he simply stood there, gripping the railing of the hospital steps as if it might hold him together. In his mind, images clashed violently. Elaine in their younger years, laughing in the kitchen as she baked pies, her hair falling into her face while he teased her. Elaine at their wedding, her eyes shining with vows that had once felt unshakable. And now Elaine in that hospital bed, frail and broken, whispering apologies that only made his rage burn hotter. Why? He muttered to himself, his voice cracking in the stillness. Why wasn't I enough? He sat in his car in the parking lot for nearly an hour, staring at the steering wheel. His hands trembled as he remembered the nights he had left her alone, too consumed with work, too certain she would always be there waiting. He had thought he was being a provider, a man of responsibility. But had he, in his blind pursuit of stability, abandoned her in every way that mattered? Richard slammed a fist against the dashboard, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the confined space. Anger rose again, but now it tangled with guilt, a corrosive mixture that left him shaking. When he finally drove home, he didn't go inside right away. He stood on the porch, looking at the darkened windows of their quiet street. To the neighbors, he was the man who had it all together: steady job, pretty wife, neat house. If they only knew. If they only saw how it was unraveling behind closed doors. Inside, Richard poured himself a drink, though he barely touched it. Instead, he sat in the living room chair, staring at the framed photos on the mantel. Elaine's smile stared back at him from years gone by, mocking him with the reminder of what they had once been. He pressed his face into his hands, the sound of his muffled sobs filling the empty house. I loved you, he whispered, voice breaking, even if I didn't show it. And now I don't know if I can ever forgive you, or myself. The clock ticked past midnight, but Richard couldn't bring himself to go upstairs. He was torn between leaving for good and staying to see if redemption was even possible. For the first time, he realized the fracture in their marriage was not only Elaine's doing, it was his too. And that truth hurt more than anything else. As night fell outside the hospital window, the family sat in uneasy silence. Richard's fury, Margaret's compassion, and Elaine's shame collided in the room, an invisible war with no easy victor. For Elaine, the weight of her choice pressed heavier than the infection itself. She had not only endangered her body, she had fractured the people she loved most. And as she drifted into restless sleep, she wondered if forgiveness was even possible, or if this night of weakness had condemned her forever. Elaine could not rest. Even as her body weakened under the hospital's sterile lights, her mind circled one truth she could no longer ignore. Darren had known. The flicker in his eyes that morning, the silence when she demanded answers, it haunted her like a shadow. By the third day, against the advice of her doctors, she insisted on leaving her room. Monica wheeled her out, a blanket draped over her lap, the foreline temporarily removed. Are you sure about this? Monica asked, worry etched in her voice. I have to face him, Elaine whispered, her voice hoarse. I need to hear it from him. They found Darren sitting on the back steps of his apartment, a cigarette dangling between his fingers, though he wasn't smoking it. His head was bowed, his shoulders slumped, the swagger stripped away. When Elaine's figure appeared at the bottom of the steps, Darren's eyes widened. You shouldn't be out here, he stammered, standing quickly. Elaine's voice shook, but her words cut sharp. Don't tell me where I should be. Tell me what you did to me. He froze, lips parting, but nothing came out. Her anger, long simmering beneath shame, erupted. You knew, didn't you? You knew something was wrong with you. And you let me. Her voice broke, tears filling her eyes. You let me throw my life away for one night while you stayed silent. Darren's hand trembled as he crushed the cigarette against the railing. I didn't want to hurt you, he said finally, his voice barely audible. I didn't want to be alone anymore. You looked at me like I mattered. No one ever does. That's your excuse? Elaine spat, clutching the railing for balance. You wanted to feel wanted, so you gave me this? Her voice rose, raw and trembling. Do you know what the doctors told me? They said I might not survive. Do you understand that? Darren's eyes glistened, his bravado gone. I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice breaking. I should have told you. I was scared. If I admitted it, it would be real. And I didn't want to live with that. Elaine let out a bitter laugh that turned into a sob. You were scared? What about me? I was desperate for love, Darren. Desperate to feel alive. And now I might die because you were too much of a coward to speak. The air between them grew heavy, the weight of her words pressing down. Darren tried to reach for her, but she pulled back, eyes blazing. Don't you dare touch me, she hissed. You took enough already. For a long moment, they stood in silence, two broken souls bound by a night that neither could undo. Finally, Elaine turned away, her body trembling with rage and despair. Monica wheeled her back toward the car, her voice low. You got what you came for? Elaine wiped at her tears. No, there's no truth that makes this better. There's only what he stole from me. Behind them, Darren sank back onto the steps, burying his face in his hands. He had wanted to feel seen, but now he was exposed in the worst way, marked not just by his sickness, but by the destruction he had unleashed. Within days, Elaine's story broke free of the hospital walls and cafe whispers. It spilled on his social media, where speculation thrived and judgment multiplied. A local teenager posted a vague status. Crazy what happens when older women go after younger guys. Karma's real. The post exploded with comments, shares, and cruel emojis. Soon, Elaine's name wasn't just whispered in town. It was trending in their county. The internet made no room for nuance. She knew better. One comment read, 36 years old, going after a kid? Serves her right. Another countered with fury, don't you dare blame her. That boy knew he was sick and said nothing. He's a predator. Arguments raged beneath every post. Some painted Elaine as a cautionary tale of adultery, a fallen wife who brought ruin upon herself. Others defended her as a victim of deceit, a woman who made a mistake but didn't deserve to be destroyed by it. At the local church, Pastor Reynolds preached a thinly veiled sermon about temptation and consequence. When we stray from God's path, darkness follows, he declared from the pulpit. Though he never mentioned names, the congregation didn't need him to. Eyes flickered, whispers hissed, and Elaine's family, her mother and Richard, felt the weight of every glance. Meanwhile, Darren found himself branded overnight. At the gas station, a stranger spit near his feet. At the grocery store, mothers tugged their daughters away from him as if his sickness could leap from the air. Online, his classmates flooded his inbox with messages, "Murderer. You ruined her life. Stay away from us." He stopped logging in after the threats began. But in a small town, there was no hiding. His face was stamped into the scandal as firmly as Elaine's. For Elaine, the online circus was a second wound. Monica showed her some of the posts, hoping to prepare her. You need to know what's out there, she said softly. Elaine scrolled through trembling fingers, reading words that gutted her. Slut. Desperate. Disgrace. Then others. Victim. Survivor. Stronger than him. The contradictions left her dizzy. She slammed the phone down, tears blurring her vision. I'm not a headline, she whispered. I'm not a lesson or a meme. I'm just broken. Monica squeezed her hand. They don't get to define you. But this town will chew up both of you before it ever shows mercy. The hospital issued a statement without names, urging caution and awareness about sexually transmitted infections. But it only fed the fire. Radio hosts debated morality versus responsibility. Parents whispered warnings to their teens. The story wasn't just Elaine's anymore. It had become a parable the community twisted to suit their fears and biases. At night, Elaine lay awake, for humming beside her, watching her life unravel in real time. She had wanted one night to feel alive. Instead, the world was tearing her apart, deciding what her choices meant, deciding who she was. And somewhere in the dark of his apartment, Darren scrolled through the same storm, realizing that for both of them, there would be no going back. Elaine's body was giving up long before her spirit was ready to. Each day in the hospital brought new waves of pain, searing cramps, burning fevers, and the constant hum of machines trying to keep her steady. Nurses moved briskly around her bed, hanging for bags, checking monitors, whispering updates to Dr. Harris. But no matter how many antibiotics they pushed into her veins, the infection clung stubbornly, spreading faster than anyone anticipated. On the fourth night, Dr. Harris stood at her bedside, his expression grave. Richard and Margaret hovered near the foot of the bed, their faces tense. "Elaine," the doctor said gently, "the medication isn't working fast enough. The infection is severe. We'll need to operate to remove damaged tissue. If we don't, your life will be in immediate danger." The words hit the room like a thunderclap. Richard's fists clenched, his jaw locked. Margaret whispered a prayer under her breath. Elaine swallowed hard, her throat dry. She had feared this moment, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real. "Will I survive?" she asked, voice trembling. Dr. Harris hesitated before answering. "We're going to do everything we can, but it will be a long recovery, and things may never be the same." The meaning was clear. Elaine turned her face toward the ceiling, tears pooling in her eyes. Her recklessness had brought her to this moment, her body on the brink, her family fractured, her dignity shredded. She thought of Darren's silence, his cowardice, and a bitter rage rose in her chest. But beneath it was also a quiet resolve. "Do it," she whispered finally. "I'm not ready to die." The hours that followed blurred into a haze of bright lights, masked faces, and the sharp scent of disinfectant. Elaine drifted in and out of consciousness as surgeons worked to save her, scraping away the infection, fighting against time. When she woke again, her body felt hollow, carved and weakened, but alive. Margaret sat beside her, still clutching the rosary, whispering thanks to God. Richard stood stiffly in the corner, torn between resentment and reluctant relief. Elaine's voice was faint, but steady. "I made it." Dr. Harris appeared, his eyes weary but kind. "You did. But this was close, Elaine. Too close. Your body will bear scars, physical and otherwise. You must understand how fragile the line is between survival and tragedy." Elaine nodded, the reality sinking into her bones. She had been spared, but the cost was permanent. That night, as the ward settled into quiet, Elaine lay awake, staring at the faint glow of the monitor. Her body ached with every breath, but her mind burned with clarity. She thought of the women in her town, of girls who might one day feel the same loneliness, the same hunger that had driven her into Darren's arms. She thought of secrets hidden in the dark, of the silence that nearly killed her. "I won't let this be for nothing," she murmured to herself, gripping the edge of the blanket. "If I survive, I'll make sure no one else walks blind into the same fire." The vow gave her a strange strength. Her body was broken, yes, but her spirit, for the first time in years, felt alive. When Elaine was finally discharged from the hospital, weeks had passed. She walked slowly, leaning on a cane, her body still fragile from surgery. The town that once knew her as the quiet wife on the corner street now looked at her with eyes that carried judgment, pity, or both. Every grocery trip, every church service, every casual glance was heavy with unspoken words. One of Elaine's first trips outside after her release was to the local grocery store. Margaret insisted on coming with her, steadying her as she moved carefully with her cane. The fluorescent lights inside buzzed faintly, and the air smelled of coffee and produce. But to Elaine it felt like stepping into a cage where every eye turned her way. She kept her gaze down at first, focusing on the shelves, apples, bread, milk, simple things that once meant nothing but now felt impossibly heavy. Conversations around her slowed, then hushed, as though the entire store inhaled and forgot how to breathe. "Is that her?" Someone whispered near the bakery section. "Yes, that's Elaine Carter, the one from the hospital. She looks awful. Poor Richard." Don't pity her. She made her own bed. The words sliced through her, sharper than any scalpel. Elaine's knuckles whitened around the cart handle. Margaret straightened beside her, glaring at the murmuring voices, but said nothing. At the checkout line, the tension thickened. The cashier, a girl barely out of high school, avoided her eyes, scanning items in silence. Behind Elaine, two women in church dresses pretended to browse magazines, their whispers dripping with judgment. She went with that boy. What was his name? Darren. 18. Just a child. Disgusting. And now she wants sympathy. Elaine's chest tightened. Shame pressed down until she could barely breathe. She wanted to scream that she wasn't a monster, that she hadn't set out to ruin her life. But her voice stayed trapped in her throat. When they left the store, Margaret wrapped an arm firmly around her. Keep your head up, child. Let them choke on their own words. But the gauntlet wasn't over. That Sunday, Elaine returned to church for the first time since her hospitalization. She walked slowly down the aisle, her cane tapping against the polished wood. The choir's hymn faltered as she passed. Whispers spread like wildfire through the pews. Pastor Reynolds paused mid-sermon when he saw her, clearing his throat before continuing about temptation and the wages of sin. Though he never named her, the meaning was clear. Elaine lowered her eyes, heat rising in her cheeks, every syllable landing like a stone on her back. When the service ended, some women approached Margaret with polite smiles, asking about Elaine's health. But their eyes lingered too long, full of quiet condemnation. Others turned away altogether, gathering their children close as if Elaine carried something contagious beyond her illness. Outside, the sunlight was too bright, the air too sharp. Elaine gripped her cane tightly, whispering to her mother, I thought coming here would help me heal, but all I feel is smaller. Margaret squeezed her hand. Then remember this, their whispers don't define you. You've already survived what would have killed another. That makes you stronger than all of them combined. Elaine blinked back tears. For the first time, she began to see the truth. Her battle wasn't only against sickness. It was against the judgment of a world eager to turn her into a cautionary tale. Richard remained distant. He drove her home, carried her bags inside, but his silence was sharper than any argument. At night, he slept on the edge of the bed, his back turned. Elaine could feel the wall between them, tall and cold. She no longer begged for his forgiveness. She knew the fracture in their marriage might never heal. Margaret, however, never left her side. The old woman's hands, though frail, steadied Elaine in her darkest hours. You've been given a second chance, her mother said gently one evening. Now you decide what you'll do with it. Meanwhile, Darren's life unraveled completely. His name was whispered in venom across town. Jobs refused him. His friends drifted away. Even Kyle stopped answering his calls. One night, he returned home to find the word killer scrawled in red paint across his apartment door. The boy who once laughed loudly in bars now moved like a shadow, shoulders hunched, afraid of every look. Darren's shame followed him home, and there was no refuge waiting. His parents had already heard the whispers. Neighbors at church, co-workers at the mill, even the pastor had let it slip in prayer. The Mason family name, once ordinary and forgettable, was now dragged through every corner of town. When Darren pushed open the front door, the tension inside was suffocating. His mother sat at the kitchen table, her face pale and worn. His father stood by the window, arms crossed, jaw tight. Sit down, his father said, his voice a command. Darren obeyed, lowering himself into the chair opposite his mother. She wouldn't meet his eyes. We raised you better than this, his father began, his tone heavy with anger and disappointment. You've shamed this family. You shamed yourself. That woman could have died. Darren clenched his fists under the table. I didn't mean to hurt her. I just didn't mean, his mother snapped suddenly, her voice trembling. You knew, Darren. You knew something was wrong, and you still dragged her into it. Tears filled her eyes as she pressed a hand to her mouth. What kind of son does that? Darren's throat tightened. I was scared. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to be alone. Stop, his father cut him off. You're not a child anymore. You don't get to hide behind excuses. You've made us the laughingstock of this town. Do you understand that? People spit when they say our name. Silence fell, broken only by the faint hum of the refrigerator. Darren looked at his mother, hoping for a shred of comfort, but her gaze was cold, wet with grief. Finally, his father's words dropped like a hammer. You can't stay here. Not after this. Pack your things and go. The room spun. Darren's chest tightened as though the air itself had turned solid. Dad, please. You heard me, his father barked. You're not welcome under this roof. Not until you face what you've done. His mother looked away, unable to watch as Darren stumbled up the stairs to his room. He packed what little he had into a worn duffel bag, each movement heavy with disbelief. The walls that had once felt safe now mocked him with posters from his childhood, reminders of a boy who had dreams, who thought he mattered. As he walked back down, his father stood firm at the doorway, blocking any chance of reconciliation. Darren stepped outside into the night, the duffel strap cutting into his shoulder. The door shut behind him with a finality that echoed louder than any curse. For the first time, Darren realized the full measure of what he had lost. Not just Elaine, not just the town's respect, but the anchor of family. He was adrift, unwanted, and utterly alone. He thought often about reaching out to Elaine, to apologize once more, to beg her forgiveness. But each time he remembered the fury in her eyes, the words she hissed, "You took enough already." He knew she would never grant him peace. For Elaine, healing was not just about her body. It was about reclaiming a sense of self after losing nearly everything. She began journaling late at night, her pen scratching across paper as she poured out her guilt, her pain, her longing. Slowly, her writing shifted from confession to purpose. Months later, she stood nervously at the podium of a small community health meeting, her cane at her side. The room was filled with women, some young, some middle-aged, curious, skeptical, yet listening. Elaine took a deep breath and began. "I made a mistake," she said plainly, her voice trembling but steady. "A mistake that nearly cost me my life. I was lonely. I was desperate. And I put myself in the hands of someone who was careless with the truth. I want you to hear me when I say this. No moment of passion is worth your health, your life, or your dignity." Her words cut through the room, raw and unpolished. She told her story, not as gossip had twisted it, not as social media had mocked it, but as it truly was. For a long moment after Elaine's final words, silence filled the hall. She could hear her own heart pounding, the faint hum of the overhead lights, the squeak of a chair shifting. Then, slowly, reactions began to ripple across the room. From the front row, an older woman dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief. She whispered to the person beside her, "That could have been me, years ago. I know what loneliness can do." But from the back, a man scoffed loudly. "She's just trying to spin her shame into a lesson. Don't dress sin up as courage." His voice carried, drawing murmurs of agreement from a few scattered seats. A teenage girl sitting near the aisle leaned forward, her face pale but intent. When the meeting broke into hushed conversations, she stood and spoke up, her voice shaking. "Mrs. Carter, thank you. People don't talk about this stuff. Not here. You made me realize I can't stay silent either." Tears welled in her eyes, and her mother quickly pulled her down, whispering frantically, but the words had already landed. Elaine's knees trembled. She gripped the edge of the podium, her cane resting against her side. Every pair of eyes in the room bore into her, some with sympathy, some with contempt. Pastor Reynolds, seated near the back, cleared his throat. "You speak of mistakes as if they excuse the pain caused. We must remember the path of righteousness." His words were met with a sharp reply from Monica, who had been sitting quietly until then. "No, Pastor," Monica said firmly, rising to her feet. "This is what righteousness looks like, telling the truth, even when it costs you everything." Elaine nearly died. If her suffering can warn someone else, that's not sin. That's grace. The hall erupted in low arguments. Some nodded at Monica's words, others shook their heads. A man muttered, "She broke her vows." Another countered, "He lied about being sick. That boy is the one who should be standing here answering." Elaine stood silently, absorbing it all, the compassion, the condemnation, the raw divide her presence created. For the first time, she understood that her story would never be seen in one light. She would be hated and pitted, shamed and respected, all at once. When the crowd finally dispersed, a young mother approached Elaine quietly, her daughter clutching her hand. "I just wanted to say, your pain won't be wasted. You may have saved her life tonight." She squeezed her child's fingers, nodding once before slipping away. Elaine exhaled slowly, feeling both lighter and heavier. She had opened her wounds for all to see, and the town had answered with both daggers and bomb. Yet, as Margaret steadied her arm, Elaine realized something vital. Whether they condemned her or not, she had taken back her voice. The silence that followed was heavy, but in it Elaine felt something she had longed for. She was being heard, not judged. When she stepped down, Margaret squeezed her hand proudly. Richard did not come, he rarely did, but that no longer crushed her. For the first time in years, Elaine felt she had a voice of her own. The scandal had left scars on her body, her marriage, her reputation. Darren remained a pariah, lost in his shame. But Elaine had chosen to rise from the ashes, to turn her suffering into warning, her weakness into strength. In the days following her speech, the echoes lingered far longer than the applause or the whispers in that small hall. Some praised her bravery, others spat her name with renewed venom, but no one ignored her anymore. Elaine sat on her porch one evening, the cane leaning against her chair, watching the sun dip below the rooftops. The street was quiet, but she could sense unseen eyes behind curtains, measuring her every move. For once, she did not shrink from it. Richard emerged from the house, silent as always. He stood for a long moment, hands in his pockets, then finally sat in the chair beside her. The air between them was thick with words left unsaid. "You spoke well," he murmured at last, his gaze fixed on the fading horizon. Elaine blinked, unsure if she had heard him correctly. It was the first kind word he had given her in months. "Thank you," she whispered. He didn't offer forgiveness, not yet. But in his tone, there was a sliver of something that might one day bend toward understanding. That alone was enough to ease a corner of her burden. Meanwhile, across town, Darren wandered the empty back roads. He had no home now, no welcome place to rest. His name had become poison, and even his family's door was barred to him. He carried the weight of Elaine's eyes in his memory, fury, betrayal, despair, and knew he would never escape it. Some nights, he wondered if punishment by law would have been easier than the slow death of being hated everywhere he turned. The town itself seemed changed, though not in ways visible to the eye. Conversations about morality, loneliness, and responsibility lingered in homes, in pews, in quiet talks between mothers and daughters. Elaine had become a mirror, forcing everyone to see not only her mistakes, but their own fragile hungers, their own secrets hidden just beneath the surface. Elaine's mother, Margaret, often reminded her, "The world will never see you one way, child. Some will damn you, some will pity you, some will learn from you. But the only truth that matters is the one you choose to carry." On one quiet morning, Elaine wrote those words in her journal, underlining them twice. She realized her life would never return to the way it was. Her body carried scars, her marriage teetered on a ledge, her reputation might never fully recover. But she had survived, and in survival there was a new kind of power. As she closed the journal and looked out at the dawn breaking over the rooftops, she felt something she hadn't known in years. Not the fire of reckless desire, not the ache of loneliness, but the steady ember of resolve. She had walked through shame, through sickness, through whispers sharpened into knives. And still, she was here. And in a town that thrived on whispers, Elaine Carter became something unexpected. Not just a cautionary tale, but a living reminder that one reckless night can destroy, or, if survived, redefine, a life forever.